The fluorescent lights in the boardroom hummed like they always did on a Wellington Monday morning. But this time, the sound felt almost peaceful as my line manager pushed a manila folder across the polished Kari table. Inside was a single grainy photograph of me walking into a glass-fronted building on Featherston Street the previous Saturday afternoon. Not exactly a smoking gun, but apparently enough for the decision they'd already made before I sat down. "We've received troubling reports about your weekend activities, Hazel," my manager said, his voice doing that careful HR-neutral thing, while his eyes stayed flat as river stones. "Your contract is unambiguous. Working for another organization while employed at Thornley Capital constitutes a fundamental breach of trust." Beside him sat the head of compliance, a woman I'd only ever seen at all-hands meetings, her mouth pressed into a thin line of practiced disappointment. "We have a zero-tolerance policy on dual employment. There's no version of this conversation where you keep your role here." I waited for the panic to rise in my chest, the way it always did when something went wrong at work, the same panic that had kept me awake at 3 a.m. for nearly 4 years. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt something strange settle over me, light and clean, like the moment after a long-held breath finally releases. My hands stayed folded. My shoulders dropped a full inch. "Your employment is terminated, effective immediately." My manager slid a printed letter across to me, the kind of letter that uses the word regrettable in 3 different paragraphs. "Security will accompany you to your desk to collect any personal items. We'll need all credentials and access tokens before you leave the building." I picked up the pen they'd placed beside the letter, signed where the little yellow sticky tab pointed, and slid the page back towards him. Then I smiled, because I genuinely couldn't help it. "You're absolutely right," I said. "I should focus on one position. Thank you for making that easier for me." The two of them flickered for just a heartbeat, the way people do when the script in their heads doesn't match what's actually happening. They had clearly prepared for tears, for a defensive speech, perhaps for me to threaten the Employment Relations Authority. The composure on my face wasn't in their slide deck. The compliance head cleared her throat. "We'll need a complete handover document by end of day. Passwords, vendor contacts, the lot. Everything's in the shared drive," I said, which was technically true. Filed exactly the way the operations manual requires. That was also a particular kind of truth. The files existed. They were comprehensive. They were also written in the dense, internal jargon-heavy style that the head of operations had personally insisted upon 2 years ago when he'd rejected my plain English version as not professional enough. Anyone reading those documents would technically have all the information. They would also need about 6 months and a senior mentor to actually understand what any of it meant in practice. Security walked me back to my desk through the open-plan floor, and the whole place went quiet in that hushed, theatrical way offices do when someone is being walked out. People I'd worked with for nearly 4 years suddenly developed an intense interest in their monitors. I packed up the things on my desk into a courier box. A chipped, flat white mug from a cafe in Cuba Street that no longer existed, a small cowhide seedling in a terracotta pot that had somehow survived my schedule, and a leather-bound notebook full of architectural diagrams that only I could read. The head of technology was watching from the glass office at the end of the row, his arms folded, his expression unreadable. He didn't come out. He didn't need to. He, more than anyone in that building, knew exactly what was about to unfold over the next several days, and he was choosing the path of least personal exposure. When the security guard escorted me into the lift, neither of us spoke. Down on Lambton Quay, the spring wind was sharp off the harbor, and I stood on the footpath for a moment, just breathing it in. I couldn't remember the last time I'd inhaled without my chest feeling tight. Then my phone buzzed in my coat pocket, and I knew before I looked who it would be. "Still good for 2 o'clock?" I typed back with one hand while flagging down a taxi with the other. "Yes. And tell your board I can accept the full-time offer after all. 4 years of being the entire structural beam holding up someone else's building was enough. 4 years of being the quiet person nobody saw until something broke. 4 years of warnings filed neatly into bottom drawers. Now the clock had started, and I knew exactly how many hours my old workplace had before everything I'd been holding together began coming apart. I know you're already wondering how this ends, and I promise the rest is worth the wait. If office karma stories are your thing, Take a quick second to like and subscribe so this channel keeps growing, and let me know in the comments whether you've ever been the person nobody noticed until you weren't there. Now let me back this up and explain how I ended up in that boardroom. My name is Hazel Thorncroft, and until that morning, I'd been the lead infrastructure analyst at a mid-sized investment firm that managed a substantial chunk of New Zealand superannuation funds. I was the only one in that role, which was never the plan. The original team structure called for 4 of us. Budget cuts after a bad quarter dropped that to 3. A senior analyst left for Australia. Another moved into a product team and was never replaced. By the time I'd been there 14 months, the org chart for my function had exactly 1 box on it, and my name was in it. I never set out to become the indispensable person. Everyone in tech in New Zealand will tell you that's a bad position to be in, because indispensability never translates into pay or respect, it just translates into pressure. But I'd been recruited from a smaller firm in Auckland with very specific promises. The head of technology had taken me to a long lunch at a restaurant on Quay Street and told me I'd be helping to build out a proper specialist function, that the firm was committed to modernizing its critical infrastructure, that I'd have a team underneath me within 18 months. The salary was decent rather than impressive, but the work itself sounded like the kind of thing I'd been waiting to do since university. The reality made itself known by month 3. The first restructure quietly removed the 2 roles that were supposed to report to me. By month 7, the colleague I'd been collaborating with most closely accepted a role with a bank in Sydney for nearly twice what we were being paid. His position was frozen temporarily. It was still frozen when I left. "We'll resource up after the next funding cycle," my head of technology kept telling me, in that cheerful Kiwi way that makes it sound like everything's almost sorted. The next funding cycle became the next financial year. The next financial year became after the operating model review. The review came and went, and the only thing that changed was that more responsibilities landed on my desk. Meanwhile, the systems themselves got more complex. The firm grew. We brought on 3 new institutional clients, each with their own compliance requirements. The threat landscape evolved. I built layer after layer of protective infrastructure on nights and weekends and across 2 Christmas Day mornings because the systems didn't care that it was a public holiday. When I raised concerns in writing about specific weaknesses, my emails got red receipts and then nothing. When I asked for staff, I was thanked for my dedication. When I asked for a salary review that reflected the actual scope of my role, I was told my passion for the work was inspiring. "You're our Tonga," my head of technology, said to me once at a Friday afternoon drinks event, raising his glass like he'd just paid me a great compliment. He genuinely thought he had. The word means treasure. He used it because nobody else understood the systems the way I did. That was the precise moment I realized what I had quietly become. Not a treasure. Treasures are kept somewhere safe and admired. I was load-bearing scaffolding. Nobody notices scaffolding until it isn't there. The previous winter, I'd spotted an attempted intrusion late on a Sunday night and worked 60 hours almost without sleep to contain it before it touched any client data. I lived on instant coffee and toast at my kitchen bench for 3 days straight. The breach was prevented. Nobody outside our function ever found out it had happened. My recognition for that work was a $150 voucher for a department store and a name check in the internal newsletter. Our chief executive, who liked to talk about our world-class operational resilience in investor briefings, took home a bonus that could have funded my entire team 3 times over. By the autumn, I'd had what my partner gently called the conversation with myself. My health was suffering. My migraines had moved from monthly to weekly. My partner and I had canceled 3 weekends away in a row because something had gone sideways at work each time. I'd stopped going to my sister's Sunday dinners in Petone because I was too exhausted to drive over the hill. Something had to give before I did. I scheduled one last formal meeting with the head of technology and our chief operating officer. I prepared properly. I had charts comparing our staffing ratios to industry benchmarks, a written risk assessment, 3 concrete proposals for restructuring the function. I walked them through it carefully. "Our current model is unsustainable," I said. "If I'm unavailable for any reason, illness, injury, anything, there are critical processes that simply will not happen, and the consequences within 72 hours will be severe." The chief operating officer frowned in that practiced way executives have when they're about to dismiss something without engaging with it. Then we need better documentation, surely. Not more headcount. I felt something quiet and final shift in my chest. I have submitted 17 separate documentation improvement proposals over the past 2 years. Each one has been deprioritized at the quarterly planning forum. I have the dates and the email threads if you'd like to see them. There was a long, awkward silence. Then they redirected the conversation to the next agenda item. I left that meeting and walked all the way down to the waterfront before catching a bus home, and somewhere between the Beehive and the harbor, I made my decision. Not to leave. Exactly, I couldn't yet see how I'd leave, but to stop being the person who saved everyone from their own choices. A few weeks later, I was invited to speak at a small finance sector security conference in Auckland. Travel budget was officially frozen, but the conference organizer was a woman I'd done my master's with, and she'd specifically requested me by name. The marketing team approved it because they wanted the brand visibility. I gave a 40-minute talk on layered resilience design that I'd written almost entirely on my own time, and it was the first time in years I'd felt like a professional rather than a human help desk. After the session, a woman about my age came up and introduced herself as the head of operational technology for a competitor, not a direct one, but a firm in an adjacent space that worked with a lot of the same kinds of clients. Her name was Ren Maddox. She was sharp, warm, and asked the kind of follow-up questions that told me she'd actually understood the talk rather than just listened politely. "I'd love to pick your brain properly sometime," she said. "Strictly theoretical, of course. We're rebuilding a few of our internal frameworks, and your perspective would be invaluable." She gave me her card. The offer was respectful and clean, and the consulting rate she mentioned for weekend advisory work was more than I made in a fortnight at my actual job. The work would be advisory only. No access to her firm's actual systems. Nothing operational. Nothing that would let any reasonable lawyer call it a conflict. I thought about it for nearly a week. My partner, who'd watched me cry over my laptop more times than either of us could count, said only, "It's your call, but you deserve to be in a room where someone actually listens to you." I emailed Ren on a Sunday night and accepted. For 9 weeks, I lived 2 parallel professional lives. From Monday to Friday, I was the invisible woman at Thornley, holding the digital walls together with what was effectively duct tape and stubbornness. On weekends, in a meeting room above a cafe off Featherston Street, I was a respected expert giving structured advice to a roomful of competent people who took notes and asked thoughtful questions. The contrast was almost disorienting. I started sleeping properly again. My migraines eased. My partner caught me humming in the kitchen one Saturday morning and looked at me as if she'd half forgotten I could. Then, on the 9th weekend, someone from my firm's marketing team apparently spotted my car parked on a side street and asked their boyfriend, who knew someone at compliance. By Monday morning, the manila folder with the grainy photo was sitting on my manager's desk, and my 4-year career at Thornley was effectively over. What none of them stopped to consider, in the rush to make an example of me, was that the entire authentication and reconciliation environment I'd been quietly maintaining required a specific manual process every Wednesday. A process I'd flagged in writing as a critical, single point of failure for the past 2 years, and which I'd repeatedly offered to either automate or train someone else to perform. The automation request had been deprioritized twice. The training had never been scheduled because nobody could be spared from their own workload. So every Wednesday, I'd done it myself, without fanfare, like always. The next Wednesday, after my termination would land in the middle of end-of-quarter reporting, when our institutional clients pulled fund performance data in volumes 10 times higher than normal. The system would not survive that load without the manual process. I had warned about this exact scenario in formal risk reports in 3 consecutive quarters. The reports had been filed. Nobody had read them. As the security guard walked me through the foyer of the Thornley building for the last time, my phone lit up with a message from Ren. Board approved. Head of Resilience Engineering, 3 times your current package, team of 9, full benefits. When can you start? I stood on the footpath and looked back up at the glass tower I'd given the best 4 years of my career to. The guard was looking at his shoes, plainly uncomfortable. "Can I ask you something?" I said quietly. He glanced up. Is it worth it? Working for people who'll throw you out like this the moment they think it suits them? He didn't answer, but something passed across his face that told me the question had landed and that he'd be thinking about it for the rest of the day. I texted Ren back from the bus stop. I can start Monday. By Friday afternoon, I'd signed a contract with Ren's firm Halcyon Bay Capital as their new head of resilience engineering, with a team of 9 reporting to me, 3 times my old package, full health care, and a sensible amount of equity. The relief was so physical, I sat in my car in the driveway for 10 minutes before I went inside, just feeling my own heartbeat slow down to something normal. My partner made me a roast chicken that night, and we ate it on the couch like teenagers, and for the first time I couldn't remember how long, my phone didn't go off once. I spent the weekend properly. I went to the farmer's market with my partner. I walked along the south coast and watched the seals at Red Rocks. I slept until 8 on Sunday morning, which felt almost decadent. No 3 a.m. alerts. No urgent please call me texts. Just quiet. On Monday morning, I walked into Halcyon Bay's office, wearing a new blazer I'd splurged on over the weekend, and the difference hit me before I'd even reached the front desk. The receptionist knew my name. Ren came down to meet me personally. She walked me through the floor and introduced me to my new team, who were already gathered in our morning stand-up. My team? I said, and the words felt strange in my mouth. 4 years of using I had hollowed out my vocabulary. 9 specialists, Ren said cheerfully, each with clearly defined scope, none of them working 60-hour weeks by company policy. You're going to actually have to delegate things, Hazel. I'm warning you now. It'll feel weird at first. The team looked at me with curiosity rather than relief. They were friendly, sharp, and did not appear to be drowning. A young engineer named Bridie Crosswell, who handled threat intelligence, asked me a question about a specific design pattern from my conference talk, and then immediately pushed back on one of my assumptions in a way that was so respectful and so substantive that I had to take a moment to gather myself. That was a thing colleagues did. That was collaboration. I had genuinely forgotten what it felt like. Meanwhile, across the central business district, the slow disaster I'd predicted was starting to gather. I didn't need anyone to tell me. I knew the rhythm of those systems, the way you know the breathing pattern of someone you love. Monday afternoon, the first authentication queue would be a little slower than usual. By Tuesday morning, log files would be approaching their tipping point. By Wednesday afternoon, exactly 72 hours after my departure, during the heaviest reporting load of the quarter, the cascading failures I'd warned about for 2 years would begin to unfold in real time. I felt a flicker of guilt, but not for the people who'd signed my termination letter. I felt it for the analysts and customer service staff who would be trying to do their jobs while their tools crumbled around them, and for the institutional clients whose quarterly reports would be unavailable through no fault of their own. The first call came at 4:50 on Monday afternoon. My old head of technology. I let it ring through to voicemail. He left a vague message about a small authentication issue. Probably just a config glitch. Give me a bell when you can. I deleted it without listening to the end. On Tuesday morning, 3 more calls came through, each from someone slightly more senior than the last. By midday, the tone had shifted dramatically. A message from someone in the chief executive's office. Significant slowdowns. Technical team unable to resolve. Urgent need to discuss consultancy terms for my return. I texted back 6 words. I'm focusing on one role now. Then I went into a planning workshop with my new team and didn't think about Thornley again for the next 4 hours. That afternoon, Ren popped her head into my office. How are you settling in? It's strange, I admitted. Being heard. Having time. I keep waiting for the other shoe. She smiled, leaning against the doorframe. Most of us who've ended up here have come from places that didn't value us. That's why our retention is what it is. The shoe isn't dropping, Hazel. You're just allowed to put it down. Late on Tuesday night, an email arrived in my personal inbox from my old head of technology, marked urgent. Critical system event imminent. Whatever consulting rate you want, just name it. Please reply. I closed the laptop and went to bed. Wednesday morning, my new team and I were finalizing the architecture for a major resilience rebuild. Halcyon Bay had been planning for nearly a year. The energy in the room was extraordinary. 9 experienced people, all engaged, all contributing, building something that wasn't a workaround for someone else's bad decisions. Around 2 in the afternoon, my phone began vibrating continuously. I silenced it without looking. By the time I checked at the end of our session, I had 23 missed calls and double that in messages. One was from my old line manager, the one who'd handed me the termination letter. Legal has reviewed your termination. We may have acted hastily. Please call urgently. One was from the head of compliance. Whatever the new firm is paying you, we will double it. One was from the chief executive himself, his first ever direct contact with me in 4 years of employment. Major institutional clients losing access to quarter-end reporting, regulatory concerns escalating. Please call immediately. I felt no satisfaction reading any of it. Just a strange, hollow confirmation that everything I'd been quietly saying for years had been true the whole time. They'd built their entire operating model on my back, then shoved me out the door without taking a single moment to understand what was actually keeping them upright. That evening, driving home along the harbor, I caught a breaking news item on the car radio. A major Wellington-based investment manager was experiencing what reporters were carefully calling significant technical difficulties. Institutional clients unable to access end-of-quarter data. Possible regulatory implications. The firm wasn't named yet, but it would be by morning, once the markets opened and the analysts started asking questions. At home, I poured myself a glass of Pinot from a bottle I'd been saving, and I sat on the deck watching the sky turn pink over the Tararua Range. My phone rang. The head of technology. This time I answered. Hazel. His voice was wrecked. I'd never heard him sound like that. Everything's gone. The reconciliation chain is broken in 3 places. Authentication's collapsed in waves. Nobody on the floor knows how to stop it. I told you, I said, very quietly. For 2 years, I told you. I know. The admission seemed to physically hurt him. Just tell me what to do. Anything. Whatever you want. I took a slow sip of wine. It's not about money anymore. It's about what got us here. We valued you, Hazel. No. You valued what I produced. Not enough to staff alongside me. Not enough to listen when I said the model wouldn't hold. Not enough to credit me publicly. Not enough to read the risk reports. There's a difference between valuing someone and being relieved they exist. He didn't say anything. I could hear shouting in the background, someone giving urgent instructions, a phone ringing on another desk. Do you know what would have prevented every minute of what's happening to you right now? I went on. Any one other person in that building, understanding the systems I built. Anyone reading the warnings I documented every quarter. Anyone listening when I said this exact week would happen if I left. He breathed out hard. Just please. What do we do? The recovery procedure is in the disaster recovery folder I submitted last June, I said. The one that was deprioritized because I was, and I quote, handling everything so well. I ended the call and turned my phone face down on the deck table. On Thursday morning, Ren was waiting for me in the foyer with a tablet. The headline across the business section was uncompromising. Thornley Capital Systems' failure wipes hundreds of millions in market value as institutional clients pull funds. The share price had dropped 38% at open. 2 regulators had launched preliminary inquiries. They've been ringing our switchboard since 6 this morning, Ren said. Trying to reach you through us. Are they suggesting I caused it? She nodded grimly. Officially, they're being very careful with their wording. Unofficially, they're floating sabotage. Our legal team has already reviewed your contract, your exit, every email. You're untouchable. They're just looking for someone to blame because they can't bear to look at themselves yet. We walked to my office together, and the weight I'd shed over the previous week began creeping back. Not from guilt I'd done nothing wrong, and I knew it bone deep, but from sheer exhaustion at the realization that even now, at the bottom of the hole they dug themselves, the people in charge were still trying to make it someone else's fault. My team was waiting. Bridie spoke first. Is it true? She asked. About your old place? I nodded. It is. Did you really build their entire critical infrastructure on your own? Not by choice, I said. By attrition. A senior engineer, an older man named Te Aroha Witiora, who'd worked across half the country's banks, leaned back in his chair. Well, their disaster will be very educational for the rest of us. Let's make absolutely certain that nothing we build here ever sits on a single set of shoulders, including yours, Hazel. Something behind my breastbone moved at that. That was leadership. Acknowledging expertise without becoming dependent on it. By Thursday afternoon, the news was getting worse for Thornley by the hour. 2 more regulators had opened files. 3 institutional clients had publicly announced they were reviewing their relationships. The share price had dropped another 12%. My phone, finally back on, had 57 missed calls. The most recent was from an unknown number, and the voicemail was from the chair of Thornley's board himself. He introduced himself as Lawrence Halverston, and he sounded like a man who had not slept since Tuesday. The board, he said, had removed several executives that morning. My old line manager, the head of compliance, the chief operating officer, who'd told me we needed better documentation, not more people. They had been identified as primarily responsible for the systemic failures that led to my termination and the subsequent crisis. The board recognized that very serious misjudgments had been made. He requested, with great formality, that I return his call directly. I sat with that voicemail for a long time. Part of me wanted to delete it and let them keep paying the full price for what they'd done. Another part of me, the part that had been thinking about Taya Roja's words, and about the analysts and customer service staff who'd had nothing to do with any of this, couldn't quite walk away. Ren found me on the breakout balcony at 4. She'd already heard. "They're requesting emergency consulting from you," she said. "One day, remote, eye-watering rate, no ongoing tie. What do you think?" She considered it carefully. "Professionally, it doesn't damage us. If anything, it elevates you. Personally, you owe them nothing. Genuinely nothing." I went back inside. Bridie fell into step beside me on the way to my office. "You know," she said, in that thoughtful way she had, "sometimes the loudest message you can send isn't to let someone fail completely. Sometimes it's letting them watch you save them from the things they refuse to listen to. They never forget that. It changes how a place works for years afterwards." I stopped at my office door. "Why?" She shrugged. "Because if you help them, they have to live forever with 2 facts at once. That you could have prevented all of this, and that you were generous enough to help them anyway. That's not something an organization forgets. That's the kind of thing that rewires it." I sat at my desk for 10 minutes, looking at Lawrence Halverston's number. Then I rang it. He answered on the second ring. "Miss Thorncroft. Thank you. Mr. Halverston. I understand the firm is having difficulties." That would be a generous description. "We're looking at an extinction-level event by Monday if the reconciliation chain isn't restored. Our institutional clients are already lawyering up over breach of mandate questions." I let the silence stretch out a bit. "The board has reviewed your termination," he said, into that silence, "and the warnings on file, and the staffing requests, and the documentation backlog. I won't insult you by listing what we've found. Suffice to say, significant errors of judgment were made over a sustained period. They were." He took a breath. "We're prepared to offer substantial compensation for any guidance you can provide. Name your number." I'd thought about this exact moment on a lot of sleepless nights. I'd imagined the satisfaction of saying no, but I'd also been listening to Bridie, and to Taya Roja, and to my own quieter self. "My fee for emergency advisory work is $2.5 million, I said evenly. "Flat, paid into a nominated account before I open my laptop. And the engagement comes with conditions." He didn't even pause. "Agreed in principle. Your conditions? First, I work entirely remotely. I do not enter your premises ever again. Understood. Second, I provide written instructions and verbal guidance only. Your team executes. I will not directly access any of your systems. Difficult, but acceptable. Third, the firm publishes a public statement, signed by the board, acknowledging that I raised the specific risks that led to this incident on multiple documented occasions over a period of 2 years, and that my warnings were not acted upon. The legal exposure of saying that is, I imagine, considerably less than the legal exposure of pretending otherwise. There was a pause. Yes. That's a fair assessment. Fourth, every member of my original function who was made redundant during the cuts of the past 3 years receives 6 months additional severance, calculated from the current date, plus a written reference from the board. There were 4 of them. I have their names. Send them to me. 5th, the board funds and stands up the function I originally proposed, in writing, in 2022. 4 roles, minimum. Market salaries. A direct reporting line into a senior technology executive who has actually worked in the field, not someone parachuted in from elsewhere. None of this is for me. I'm not coming back. This is so that the next person in that role doesn't end up where I did. The silence on the line was different now, less defensive. Something almost like relief. Yes, he said. Yes to all of it. Transfer the fee. Send written confirmation of every condition before close of business today. And I'll start tonight. After I hung up, I sat in my chair for a long time, looking out across the harbor at the lights coming on over Eastbourne. Not revenge as I'd once imagined it, lying awake on the bad nights. Something else, something heavier and quieter. Accountability, at last. Structural change, paid for in lessons people couldn't ignore anymore. Ren tapped on my open door. How did it go? I told her. Using their crisis to force the kind of structural change they should have made on their own, she said. That's not revenge. That's leadership. It's not about making them suffer, I said. It's about making sure that whoever's sitting in my old chair next year doesn't end up where I was. That instinct, she said, is exactly why we recruited you. And it lines up almost perfectly with something I wanted to talk to you about. The board signed off this morning on launching a national resilience advisory practice. We've had 19 inbound enquiries since the Thornley news broke. Firms genuinely terrified they're sitting on the same time bomb. We need someone to lead that practice, Hazel. Someone with credibility. I looked at her. She was already smiling. Present the proposal to the board next week, she said. Structure, staffing, target market. Take it as far as you want it to go. By that evening, I was on a video call with the team that had taken over my old function, walking them step by step through a recovery procedure I had documented and submitted nearly 12 months earlier. They were sharp people, but they had no contextual knowledge, because nobody had ever been allowed the time to give it to them. For 5 hours, I explained not only what to do, but why each step mattered, teaching them the things I'd been ready to teach for years. Halfway through, my old head of technology joined the call, hollow-eyed. Hazel, I just wanted to say, this isn't the moment, I said, gently but firmly. Let's bring the systems back up first. We can speak another time, if you'd like. By 11 that night, the reconciliation chain was holding. Authentication queues were draining. Quarter-end reports were beginning to flow again, far too late to save reputations, but soon enough to prevent total collapse. Before I closed the call, I had one last thing to say to the people listening. Every system you're working with has full documentation, written by me, sitting in folders that were marked low priority for review. The vulnerabilities I warned about are listed. The recovery procedures are written down. The training plans I proposed are still in those folders. All of that exists. Read it. Build from it. And please, never let one person become the single point of failure for the things you depend on. Resilience isn't a software product. It's how you treat the people who keep things running. I closed the laptop and walked out onto my deck. The harbor was glassy and dark. A text came through from Bridie. We're at the pub on Cuba Street, celebrating the architecture sign-off. You coming? For the first time in what felt like a decade, I had no alerts to babysit. No after-hours emergency that only I could solve. No creeping dread about Monday morning. I had colleagues. I had boundaries. I had a future I'd actually chosen. On my way, I replied. A month later, I stood in front of Halcyon Bay's full executive team and presented the business case for what would become the country's first dedicated organizational resilience advisory. We hired aggressively over the following weeks. 3 months in, our team had grown to 23. By 6 months, we had 17 named clients and a waiting list. 5 of those clients had moved their business directly from Thornley. I spoke at the same finance sector conference on its next return, this time as the head of a fast-growing practice rather than a quietly desperate solo analyst. In the second row, my old head of technology sat with the new chief security officer Thornley had finally hired. Their faces, as I described our growth, told me what nothing else could have. They understood, finally, exactly what they had let walk out their door, and exactly what it had cost them to learn the lesson. Afterwards, a quiet email landed in my inbox from Lawrence Halverston, the board chair. He thanked me again for the recovery work. He confirmed that every condition had been honored. He noted, almost shyly, that the four-person team I'd specified was now in place, with proper salaries, and had already identified 6 previously unaddressed risks that the new executive was actually acting on. He ended by saying that if I were ever interested in returning, his door was open. I closed the email without replying. There was no need. My answer was already written across every press release Halcyon Bay had put out that quarter. The deepest part of any story like this isn't the moment everything falls apart for the people who let you down. It's the moment you realize you no longer want them to fall apart. You just want to be somewhere else, building something better, with people who actually see you. If this story landed somewhere true for you, please take a moment to like and subscribe and share it with someone you care about. Most of us, at some point in our careers, have been the person quietly holding everything together while no one noticed. If that's you right now, please remember a few things. Your worth is never measured by the people who fail to see it. It is measured by what you build, who you help, and how you treat the people coming up behind you. Never become so essential to a place that they can ignore the conditions you're working under when you can be replaced only by chaos. That isn't job security, it's exploitation in disguise. Document your work, but more importantly, train the people around you, because real expertise is generous, not hoarded. Ask for what you're worth in writing, and keep the receipts. Boundaries are not selfishness. They are how good people stay good. And when a place tells you, again and again, that things will improve next quarter, believe them the 3rd time. Don't make it the 8th. The right environment for you exists. It's quieter than you expect. It looks like colleagues who push back on your ideas because they respect them, not because they want your job. It looks like a manager who reads your risk reports the week you submit them. It looks like a Friday at 5 o'clock, where you actually go home. Tell me in the comments whether you've ever been the person nobody noticed until you weren't there, or whether you're sitting in that chair right now reading this on your work laptop. Your story matters too, and someone scrolling through these comments tonight may need to read it. Take care of yourselves. And remember, the best revenge is never burning the building down. It's walking out and building something better next door, in full view of the people who told you that you couldn't.